And how does somebody know if they're facing a problem when it comes to, consuming sugar? We talked about the fact that, the liver gets fatty, that leads to these metabolic diseases. Is there a way before we get to that point that we can tell like things are going awry? We quickly talked about weight gain there. Let's talk about how good of a tool that is for determining how far off we've come with sugar.
So what you're asking is, what's the metric for determining sugar consumption and ultimately metabolic health? And the answer to that is complicated. Most people use weight. And I think that is a bad idea. I think it's a very bad idea. Now, why do I think that's a bad idea? The first reason is because 20% of obese people are metabolically healthy. Conversely, 40% of normal weight people are metabolically ill. In fact, 88% of America has some metabolic deficit, according to an article from 2019. And not all of them are obese. And the reason is because there are 3 fat depots. One is called subcutaneous or big butt fat, as in, does this bathing suit make me look fat? Never answer that question. Turns out that fat is metabolically healthy. That's what your body wants to do with energy, is put it into the subcutaneous fat so that it is not dangerous. The second fat depot is visceral fat, or big belly fat. That is not good for you. But the cause of visceral fat is not calories. The cause of visceral fat is cortisol and stress. Now, cortisol and stress will make you eat more, but the visceral fat itself is responsive to cortisol and stress. And then finally, the third fat depot is the liver fat. And that liver fat depot is directly related to sugar. So the amount of fat in your liver is a marker for sugar. So how can you determine what that is? And there are several ways. One is your waist circumference. That's the cheap, free, easy way. But it's sensitive, not specific. There are other things that can make your waist go up too. Another one is fasting insulin. That's you can get on a fasting blood sample, but your physician has to draw it and has to know how to interpret it, and a lot of them don't. And then the third is an ALT, an alanine aminotransferase, which is a blood test that is normally gotten during a standard chem panel. But you have to be able to interpret that correctly, and most doctors don't interpret it correctly. And the reason is because the reference range has changed over time. And so they think a number is normal when it's not. The upper limit of ALT is 25, but on the lab slip, the upper limit of ALT is 40. So how come it was 25 and now it's 40? The answer is because everyone's got fatty liver now. 45% of America has fatty liver. So their ALT has gone up. All right. So all of these things are potential ways of figuring it out. And then, of course, there are more expensive ways, like, for instance, MRI and hepatic elastography, et cetera. Those are really, really expensive and, much more complicated and really only available on a research basis. But, blood tests will help.
And when it comes to liver fat, you mentioned sugar, and that's what we've been talking about here, that, if it's being consumed in excess, is going to lead to a fatty liver. But what other things can lead to a fatty liver, and what can cloud that water? I'm assuming alcohol would fit under that umbrella, but what else?
So there are a lot of things that cause fatty liver. There alcohol, but kids don't drink alcohol. And today, 25% of kids have fatty liver. Trans fats can cause fatty liver, but we now know that trans fats are bad for us, and so they're coming down. So that's good. And then another one, which people don't know, is branched chain amino acids, Now, branched-chain amino acids are leucine, isoleucine, valine. These are 3 essential amino acids. You have to consume them. You have to eat them. Your body doesn't make them. And they are 20% of muscle. Those 3. They're very, very high in muscle. And this is why bodybuilders put protein powder in their smoothie shakes, is to increase their branched-chain amino acid consumption so they can build more muscle. And if you're a bodybuilder, you need them because you can't make the muscle without them. Okay, but what if you're not a bodybuilder? What if you're a mere mortal like me and, you're sort of finished growing and you're not trying to grow your muscle per se, and you consume excess branched-chain amino acids, which, by the way, are in corn-fed beef, chicken, and fish, because they're in corn. They're very high in corn. All right? What does your body do with the excess branched-chain amino acids? They go to the liver. The liver deamidates them, takes the amino group off. Now they become branched-chain organic acids. And then they go into the Krebs cycle, the tricarboxylic acid cycle, the cycle that basically burns energy to make ATP. Well, again, just like we talked about before, there's a limit. There's an upper limit to how fast that thing can run, how fast it can metabolize. And if you overwhelm it, just like fructose does, you're going to turn the excess into liver fat. And it'll lay down, and now you've got chronic metabolic disease too. So that liver fat has multiple sources. But by far and away, the biggest one, and the one that we can fix tomorrow if we wanted to, is sugar.
Let's get into the nuances of taking that story even further from fatty liver. We know that eventually that leads to insulin resistance and then to the metabolic diseases. But let's talk about that. So we're at the point now where we've overloaded the liver with, sugar or these other variables that we just talked about. Talk about the physiology there of how that leads to insulin resistance.
Fat in the liver makes your insulin receptor not transduce its signal very well. When you have fat in the liver, instead, there's a protein in the liver called IRS1, insulin receptor substrate 1. And normally when insulin's working, it is tyrosine phosphorylated, but it could also be serine phosphorylated. And it turns out that the enzyme that serine phosphorylates that IRS1 is driven by the amount of fat in the liver. In addition, we have learned recently that the liver doesn't just make standard fat, doesn't make just triglyceride, but it makes a different kind of fat entirely called ceramides. Okay, the example of ceramides that you know about, that you deal with every day, is earwax. That's what earwax is ceramides. Okay? Earwax is kind of sticky, yeah? All right? Well, it turns out your liver makes ceramides. Makes sticky stuff. And it turns out that fructose consumption increases liver ceramide production, which again correlates with the de novo lipogenesis, the fat making, and also the insulin sensitivity. We published that recently, about a month ago, in the journal Nutrients. So, bottom line, fat in the liver, not good. That's not what you want. And sugar is the primary lipogenic substrate. It is the thing that makes fat in the liver go up fastest, worst. And that's why children have fatty liver. So this is, job one, is to clear the fat out of your liver. You want to know why exercise works? Because it gives your liver a chance to burn fat. You want to know why intermittent fasting works? Because it gives your liver a chance to burn off the fat. So all of the maneuvers that we know about that are associated with improvement in metabolic health and improvement in longevity are all targeted at the liver.
And then if somebody does decide they want to, take care of the liver, and maybe they've done testing and they've realized there is an accumulation of fat there, or they just, subjectively assume and they want to do the work, and they crank up their exercise or they start intermittent fasting, how quickly can that turn around?
Our data shows that you can turn that around in 9 days flat. So we did a study here at UCSF looking at 43 children with metabolic syndrome. Okay, all Latino and African American. So all, low socioeconomic status, high sugar consumers, all with obesity plus at least one comorbidity. And what we did was we figured out what they were eating at home at baseline. We studied them on their home baseline diet. And then, for the next 9 days, we catered their meals. No added sugar. We took the percent calories from their diet, as that was added sugar, 28% median, and we brought it down to 10%. Okay. Now, if you do that, you're going to get 350 to 400 calories out of the diet each day. In which case, if you did that for 10 days, you might lose weight. We didn't want them to lose weight, because if they lost weight, people would say, well, of course they got better, they lost weight. We wanted them to stay the same weight or even gain weight. So we had to replace the 350 to 400 calories per day that we were taking out as removal of sugar and add something that was equicaloric. We gave them refined starch. So we gave them more glucose. We took out the fructose and gave them more glucose. We did a glucose for fructose exchange. So in the vernacular, we took the pastries out, we put the bagels in. We took the sweetened yogurt out, we put the baked potato chips in. We took the chicken teriyaki out, we put the turkey hot dogs in. All right? So we didn't give them good food, we gave them crappy food. We gave them processed food, we gave them kid food kids would eat. But it was no added sugar food. And we gave them a scale. And every day, we'd call them up on the phone, what'd you weigh? And if it turned out they were losing weight, eat more! In order to keep their weight constant over the course of the 10 days. And then we studied them again 10 days later. And what we showed was with no change in calories and no change in weight, and no change in subcutaneous or big butt fat, the visceral fat went down 7%, the liver fat went down 22%. The turning of sugar into fat went down 46%. The triglyceride in the blood went down 49%. And their pancreases started making insulin properly again. In other words, we reversed their metabolic syndrome in 10 days with no change in calories, no change in weight. So you can actually affect things pretty quickly if you know what you're doing. And the funny part was, remember, we were giving them crappy food. What if we didn't give them the crappy food? How much faster and how much better would that have worked? So, I think that diet is by far and away the most manipulable item, in terms of improving metabolic health. And you don't have to wait that long for the effect to kick in.
You mentioned what if you guys would have given better quality food. There's also the whole layer too of exercise and intermittent fasting. If you would have layered those in as well, you can only imagine how quickly things could have turned around.
Right, absolutely. So, the more things you throw at it, the better off you'll be. And yes, we used exercise, we used intermittent fasting, but the bottom line is, if you ate real food in the first place, you wouldn't have to exercise or intermittently fast. The other thing to know about exercise, which is really important for your audience, people think, well, I can run off my bad diet. I can exercise away my bad diet. And if this were a calorie issue, then maybe that would be true. You could basically increase your energy burning to account for the excess energy intake. 3 hours of running is a Big Mac. It makes no sense, but that's what, the exercise people, like to, quote and talk about. And I think this is ridiculous. The bottom line is there are 8 subcellular pathologies going on that are driving metabolic disease. We've talked about one, glycation, but there are 7 others, and I'll name them for you real quick. Oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, insulin resistance, membrane instability, inflammation, methylation, and autophagy. Now, you never hear about any of these. And the reason you never hear about any of these is because doctors don't know about them. Number 2, there's no medicine for any of them. And so and there's no ICD-11 code for them. So why would your doctor bring up something that he doesn't understand, doesn't know how to explain, doesn't know what it's for, and can't bill for it anyway? Bottom line is those 8 subcellular pathologies, and in my book, Metabolical, I call them the hateful 8. Okay, those are the causes of chronic disease and aging. 4 of them, 4 of the 8, are responsive to exercise. Mitochondrial dysfunction, insulin resistance, inflammation, and autophagy are responsive to exercise. Now, that's good. I'm not saying that's bad. That's good. But it's not all 8. The other 4 are not responsive to exercise. So you cannot outrun a bad diet. You still have to fix the diet.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch the full episode. I'll see you over there.
It's poison. And it actually detracts from metabolic health. And we have the data to show how and why. Because fructose